we move on to F. Discussion of emergency response plan. Adam, would you like to talk about that? I know you met with everybody.
You'll see about 4 pages here. I've had some discussions with the rec center. The community rec center, and I've had some discussions with Jim Bullock. He's putting together a county meeting. This is simply for our responses to the city. One of the things we discovered in the mitigation plan, and one of the things we've talked about, and I think I've shown many of the council members prior to now, is that the mitigation plan is not really designed to give you a response-related reaction. And one of the things we were trying to do was develop an internal plan that is more related to the departments knowing basically what their marching orders are in an emergency situation. Just because you see it in here, one of the things you'll see that I did on the first page is I talked about winter storms and power failures, because technically the argument would be is this is not a catch-all program. In other circumstances, you may have a different response mechanism and a different priority list. Say, for instance, a great example would be one of them that was brought up is say you have a chemical explosion or a chemical spill. Your response methods and your actions and your end results would be different than it would be in these types of circumstances, so it almost has to be circumstance related. My ideal is that once we put this plan together, it would basically hang on the office door, or in the case of the 2 plants, on their lab doors, basically so that they can grab it and know what they need to do in a case of a situation.
And of course, probably a meeting with all the employees prior to posting it up there. Just
correct.
To go over it.
And then a couple of things outside of just knowing what our responsibilities are was also looking at what preventive actions need to be taking place. Because there's more that needs to be done than just responding to a situation, but being proactive at the same time. And this is an area where we probably had the biggest area to need to improve, was in preparation. As far as administration goes, one of the things that we need to take into consideration is possibly an annual communication to the public, or a semi-annual communication to the public, of if a shelter is going to be set up, where that shelter will be located. So, because one of the responses we were hearing back from the community is that while we had it up and we did everything during the event to try to get a hold of people, the fact of the matter was that a lot of people who would have used it were missing out on the fact because they didn't know where to go to communicate. They didn't know where we would have it set up, so they didn't even know where it existed. So being proactive in communicating that to the community on a regular basis so that at least they have it in their mindsets. A couple of the other things that come to mind is I know the last couple of years we really haven't focused on tree limb cleaning that hang over the sidewalks or over the streets. And I think the spring is going to be a very good time to remind citizens of why it's so important for us to take care of that situation. I know myself and John and Officer Mincer ourselves were dodging limbs one night because they were coming down on the street off of people's properties. And in a lot of cases, I don't think you would prevent all the limbs that were falling, but you could have prevented some of the limbs by having more maintained trees. Some of the other things that came to mind, and one of the things we did not clarify in the managers meeting, and I'm looking for the council to give me more clarification on, is something I learned in talking with our friends at Red Cross. They have some very standardized rules on how they run a shelter. And of course you might say to yourself, well, why would the city need to run a shelter? Well, Barb and I can contest to the fact that just because you think you've got Red Cross here doesn't mean you might not end up running a shelter. But they have rules, for instance, allergies related to pets. They don't allow any pets in their shelters due to allergy concerns. Having a policy in place for rules for a shelter that is city ran would be an ideal circumstance to have. Another one was food allergies. One of the things that the Red Cross has is that they don't accept outside food from residents. And of course the argument there is they don't know if it's come in contact with peanuts or if it's been around something else that is related to an allergy concern. And of course their concern is if somebody comes in and eats something that's tainted with peanut dust and has a reaction to it. So that's another area where they have strict rules. The third one is dealing with people, and they're very careful how they word this, people that are required to register either with local or federal government entities. And their justification there is they have 3 levels of response. One is general population with the rest of the people in the shelter. A second is an isolation circumstance in certain cases. And a third is where they will actually reject certain individuals from being in their shelters due to concerns about their relationship with the federal and local entities. And so there are some real circumstances that we need to look at and talk about at the council level as far as what you want to see on that segment of the plan. Because that's something that the department heads really can't give an answer to. And I've talked with Red Cross about these issues and asked them if, also asked them if there's any other unique circumstances related to shelter management we should be aware of. The things that they brought up was, of course, understanding where your bedding will come from, having some type of backup shelter location in mind. Their justification there was not so much in the case of these winter conditions, but for instance, if you had a tornado situation come through town and power was out, but it took out the rec center, where would your backup location be? And it might be a good idea to have a backup location on plan. We talked internally about the prospects, just a couple of prospects. Of course, the library wouldn't probably be the most ideal location in those type of circumstances, but it is city property and it is relatively easy to maintain. Another location that was discussed was the Catholic Church because it has all of the amenities. Of course, it would take quite a generator if need be up at that facility to keep it running. And of course, we haven't talked to any of these entities about whether or not they'd be interested in taking part. It's simply at this point is for our discussion purposes on having a secondary shelter location in mind.
Adam, who is going to refine this? Because you talked about the importance of communicating it to the people and they knowing where it is, but I don't see anything that tells how that communication is going to be done. These are pretty general in many cases.
Correct.
Who's going to take these generalities and make them specific?
That next step would be my responsibility. I will make sure that we put it into place. Under this plan, I take the responsibility for training the departments, the department supervisors on their response, and they're responsible for then training their employees on responses that they're necessarily responsible for. Administration of communication to the public would continue to be maintained by myself. One of the things that we talked about is prior, just as an educational purposes, is maybe on maybe in the paper, maybe once a year, and then maybe once or twice a year in our internal newsletter that we send out as part of the billing.
The other way you could reach a lot of them would be something through the school. Sending it home with the children.
One of the things that was brought to our attention and we're looking a little bit more into is utilizing communication. I'm sorry? Yeah, and using communication tools to contact cell phones and to be able to have some type of form of communicating either through text messages to people's cell phones who might want to take part in the system. I can't really go into the details right now. I don't know all the details myself, but apparently you can register to be part of these groups where you get automatic communications texted to your phone. And they're basically twittering, isn't that? Curtis was actually the one who even...
It would be a no-cost option. There are networks you can buy where it allows you to do the same thing without having to be beholden to Twitter's network. It would just be your network.
So we have a little more research to do on that front, but that does sound like something that could be utilized. In that case, they would just simply need to register a phone number with you, I would assume, and that way you have something on file that when these types of circumstances occur, you'd send it out to the entire network, and anyone who has a phone number registered with you would receive a communication of that fact.